What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. Right now, we are going to go into album number 10 for Iron Maiden. Let's go back to the previous albums that I had reviewed after Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. With No Prayer for the Dying, I gave it a very critical and below average review. And with Fear of the Dark, which was the last Maiden album with Bruce Dickinson and the last album to be produced by Martin Birch, that I gave it a pretty high above average review. But with this album that I'm going to be talking about, after the release of Fear of the Dark, Martin Birch had retired after 11 years of being their full-time producer for the band since 1981. For Bruce Dickinson, during the tours on promoting Fear of the Dark, he decided to leave the band and go on to his own path on his own solo material. But what's very difficult about this period, and especially for this album in the development, a lot of it was very personal for Steve Harris as he went through all-time lows. He went through a divorce with his wife at the time, his time of the passing of his father. It affected him that badly that he went into depression and suicidal thoughts. But he did not want to stop. He didn't want the band to go into the demise and with everything going down the drain. He wanted to continue the band to make a different album. So after the departure of Bruce Dickinson, hundreds of audition tapes had been made very privately to audition for the third time, in terms of the band making albums, a new singer. So who did they pick after a long process? Steve decided to accept the offer for Blaze Bayley. When people gave their reactions to Blaze being the next vocalist, they were so divided. But you've got to understand, after the departure of Paul Di'Anno, people were getting dismissive from Bruce Dickinson as the new singer. And look what happened. He became the most beloved vocalist in the band's history, period. But with Blaze Bayley, things were not very positive for the public. But who cares what people thought about it? Blaze Bayley is, for me, an incredibly underrated metal singer that deserved to be involved with a mega big band. Experiencing his time working with Maiden, it must have been nerve-wracking and very big and new to him. So, after they've hired Blaze Bayley, they went into Barnyard Studios in Essex, and without Martin Birch, Steve Harris decided to work with Nigel Green for the production for this upcoming album that took 1 year to make. Now, the previous albums from Maiden's career, most of them were made in under 2 to 3 months. And then like a month later, they were released. So, in 1995, after a year working process of portraying the darkest and bravest material, in my opinion, from Steve Harris into this next album. That's right, guys. I'm going to be talking about The X Factor. Now, The X Factor was released 3 years after Fear of the Dark, and as I said from the people's reactions, when this was released, people really gave it a lot of flack. And in my opinion, that is very unfair and highly unneeded. When I had listened to The X Factor for the first time, it was a different album. It is, as I said, the darkest and personal album the band had done, and it made me wonder and think about it more. So I played the album over and over and over and over multiple times. And to think about the previous albums and some of the later ones, The X Factor, for me, is the most underrated Iron Maiden album. So, songwriting-wise, it is on a different experiencing vibe, because with the troubles that Harris went through, casting his difficulties from his personal issues into music, I give him so much respect. There were some flaws, like I thought the production at first was not as strong, but I forgive it, because I think it is one of the other Maiden albums that is quite raw sounding, and I would give Harris and Nigel Green a lot of credit. Another thing that people give it criticism for, the vocals, with Blaze Bayley being a totally different singer to Bruce Dickinson. He sings from really low notes to some mid-range notes on his voice, and there were moments that you hear some flat notes, but you've got to understand, don't bash this album because it's Blaze Bayley and not Bruce. Think about this album because of Steve Harris. This is an album that Steve wanted to make by how he feels. So I think to really play this album so much and to forgive its flaws, most of the stuff on this album works better than the previous few Iron Maiden albums. Now, the album opens with a track called Sign of the Cross, the longest song on this record, 11 minutes. It starts on dark ambient drones with really low-pitched male singing, and that presents the album in a haunting way of expression, and with the simple notes on the bass to the guitars, and with some low, quiet vocals on Blaze's singing, to the beautiful, clean tones on the guitars, to the marching snare drum. Then the whole band just goes straight into it, with a very catchy amount of energy in the verses, and powerful chorus that is just so good. And the bridge, it is intense, again with haunting atmosphere, and this contains some of the greatest guitar soloing that I've ever heard from Yannick Gers and Dave Murray. I absolutely love both of them to cast their own craft as guitar players for an epic masterpiece of a song like this track. Sign of the Cross is my favourite Iron Maiden song ever, after 2 Minutes to Midnight from Powerslave. The single of Man on the Edge, based on the movie Falling Down as the inspiration. I really like this track. It has some aggressive playing style and a lot of attack. It's one of the songs that does remind me on some of the previous material, especially onto one of the songs on Powerslave and Peace of Mind. Lord of the Flies, to me, is a track that is very great as well. Simple but effective opening lines on the guitars, rocking but so damn catchy piece of music. There are other songs on this album that deal with the war concept on Fortunes of War and the Aftermath. Now, some of the songs may be repetitive sounding because they're very similar and alike from the songwriting. Iron Maiden had done that before on previous albums when it comes to lyricism on the walls, like Aces High from Power Slave, for example. The vocals from Blaze on these deep tracks, I think, fits. It is like a raw performance. He gave it all that he got on his vocals, as with Harris decided to have Blaze that's on a totally different sound than having someone that's very alike to Bruce Dickinson. The track Judgment of Heaven is the track that deals with Harris's depression, and it is a beautiful, positive, uplifting track with great drumming and melodic vocals. It's one of the best tracks in the whole record. The Unbeliever, which is one of my big favourites. It is like an epic in a way, like Sign of the Cross, and it's one of the tracks that was perfectly placed together from the way it was arranged, from these separate sections of this piece to that piece, connect them together, and The Unbeliever to me is a powerful song. The Edge of Darkness, lyrically based on Apocalypse Now, is another fantastic song. Really deep track, and I love how consistent this energy gets. It's, to me, another highlight of the album. For other underrated tracks, Look for the Truth, amazing song. I love the simplicity of the track with incredible lead guitar work as well. The X Factor is an album that really needed a lot of respect and some more positivity when it comes to the reactions and the responses. I've pretty much expressed most of the tracks on this record, and if you haven't heard of the X Factor, I wouldn't recommend this album as the first one to listen to if you are a beginner. For anyone to get into Iron Maiden, The Number of the Beast, or Power Slave, but for later albums I would recommend Brave New World as an example. But the X Factor, in my eyes, is the best underrated metal album ever. Now this is going to be very shocking for some Maiden fans to hear me say this. As much as I love Power Slave and Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, two of one of my favourite albums of all time, the X Factor is my favourite Iron Maiden album. I am not exaggerating whatsoever. Yes, Power Slave is completely strong. Same with Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, from beautiful and melodic approaches and progressiveness on the songwriting. But in terms of the experience, the difficulties of casting Steve Harris's troubles into life with the music, another classic Iron Maiden album. That's pretty much all I would like to say about the X Factor, and please give this album a go. Let me know what you really think of it. If you dislike this album but with fair responses, that is totally acceptable. You have to respect this album because, as I said earlier, this is a record that Steve wanted to portray into art. And the X Factor is, for me, art. I'm going to give this album a 10 out of 10. And that's all I would like to discuss and say my big analysis on this album. Give this album a go, and I cannot recommend this album enough for the better. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.